Welcome, fam. Before we dive into the story, please kindly subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share your thoughts below. I never loved you a day in 40 years. You were just convenient, the husband said to his wife at their ruby wedding. Then she stood up and said what she'd been hiding all these years. Her sister dropped her glass and the guests were stunned at what they heard. Before we continue, please write in the comments which country you're watching this video from. Enjoy listening. The Willowbrook Country Club was a vision of elegance on that crisp May evening. Its grand hall aglow with the warm flicker of chandeliers and the soft hum of celebration. It was the 40th wedding anniversary of Margaret and Harold Grayson, a milestone marked by ruby-red roses adorning every table and the clink of champagne glasses filling the air. Friends, family, and local dignitaries gathered, their laughter a testament to the couple's seemingly enduring love. Margaret, resplendent in a blue floral dress with a pearl necklace catching the light, moved gracefully among the guests, her smile polished yet tinged with an unreadable depth. Harold, gray-haired and stoic, stood beside her, his charm a practiced mask that hid the storm brewing beneath. The evening reached its crescendo when the couple took the stage for their anniversary speech. The room quieted, all eyes on them as Harold cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the silence with a chilling edge. 40 years is a long time, he began, his gaze sweeping the crowd before settling on Margaret. And I've come to a realization. Margaret, I never loved you a day in those 40 years. You were just convenient. A collective gasp rippled through the audience, the words landing like a slap. Margaret's smile froze, her hands trembling as she gripped the microphone, her blue eyes wide with shock. The room fell into a stunned hush, every guest leaning forward, their breaths held. Then, with a slow, deliberate breath, Margaret straightened, her posture regal despite the tremor in her voice. Convenient, you say? She replied, her tone laced with a steel that surprised even herself. Well, Harold, if we're laying bare the truth, I've been hiding something too. Something that might explain why I stayed all these years. Her sister Eleanor, seated at the front table, let out a sharp cry, her champagne glass slipping from her fingers. It shattered on the polished floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot drawing every eye. The guests exchanged wide-eyed glances, their curiosity piqued as Margaret prepared to unveil a secret that would unravel the fabric of their shared history. Harold's smirk faltered, his hands clenching the podium. What are you playing at, Margaret? He hissed, but she shook her head, her gaze unwavering. Oh, I'm not playing, Harold. You think this marriage was your convenience? It was mine, too, in a way, but not for the reasons you think. She paused, letting the tension build, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. When we married, I was pregnant, but the child wasn't yours. The room erupted in murmurs, and Harold's face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Eleanor buried her face in her hands, her sobs muffled but audible. Margaret glanced at her sister, a silent plea in her eyes before turning back to the crowd. The father was James Carter, a man I loved with all my heart. He worked at my father's factory and we planned to run away together, but he died hit by a car just weeks before the wedding. My family forced me to marry Harold to save face, to give my child a name. And Harold, he needed a wife to secure his inheritance. It was a transaction, not a love story. The guests sat frozen, piecing together the scandal, their whispers growing louder. But Margaret wasn't finished. What I didn't know then, she continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush, was that Harold had his own reasons, darker ones. He wasn't just convenient for me. I was a shield for him. And tonight I'm going to expose it all. Harold lunged forward, his face contorted with rage. But security guards stepped in, holding him back. The crowd watched, mesmerized, as the story promised a descent into a web of secrets that would keep them glued to the screen, eager for the next revelation. The grand hall of Willowbrook Country Club seemed to shrink under the weight of Margaret's revelation, the air thick with disbelief and anticipation. Harold struggled against the security guard's grip, his face a mask of fury and desperation. "You're a liar," he bellowed, his voice cracking as the crowd murmured, their eyes darting between him and Margaret. She stood tall, her pearl necklace glinting like a badge of resilience, her gaze steady despite the chaos. Eleanor remained hunched over, her sobs a quiet undercurrent to the escalating drama. The shattered champagne glass at her feet, a stark symbol of the evening's unraveling. Margaret raised a hand, silencing the room with a gesture that carried the authority of 40 years of suppressed truth. "Liar am I?" she said, her voice cutting through Harold's protests. "Then let's hear your side, Harold. Tell them why you married me, why you needed me so desperately that you'd erase James from my life." The mention of James sent a shiver through the crowd, their curiosity now a palpable force. Harold's struggle weakened, his shoulders slumping as the guards tightened their hold, but his eyes burned with a mix of defiance and fear. Eleanor lifted her head, her tear-streaked face pale, as she whispered, "Maggie, please." Margaret turned to her sister, her expression softening for a moment. "Elle, you've carried this long enough. It's time they know." She faced the audience again, her voice steadying. "Eleanor was there the night James died. She saw the car that hit him. Saw who was driving. It wasn't an accident, ladies and gentlemen. It was murder." The room erupted in gasps, chairs scraping as some stood, others clutching their chests in shock. Harold's laugh was bitter, a hollow sound that only deepened the tension. "You think you can prove that?" he sneered. But Margaret's smile was cold. "Oh, I can." Eleanor kept evidence. Photos, a letter from you admitting it. She's given it to the police who are on their way now. The crowd's murmurs turned to a roar, and Harold's bravado crumbled, his knees buckling slightly. Margaret continued, her tone unwavering. "I found out years later, but I stayed silent. I had to protect my son, Daniel, and Eleanor. Harold threatened us, used his power to keep us quiet. But tonight that ends." Daniel stepped forward then, a tall man with James's piercing blue eyes and Margaret's determined jawline. The room fell silent again, all eyes on him as he spoke. "I'm the child she carried, the one Harold claimed as his own. Mom raised me knowing the truth, shielding me from his cruelty. Tonight we reclaim our lives." The guests watched spellbound as the story took a turn toward justice, the camera lingering on Daniel's resolute face, promising more revelations to come. But the drama wasn't over. Margaret turned to Harold, her voice dropping to a chilling whisper. "You married me for convenience." "Yes, but it wasn't just about my family's money. You were running from something, weren't you? A debt, a scandal, a past you thought I'd bury with my silence." Harold's silence was damning, his eyes darting as if searching for an escape that no longer existed. The sound of sirens grew louder outside, a signal that the police were close, and the crowd leaned in, eager to see how this confrontation would unfold. Eleanor stood, wiping her tears, and handed a small envelope to a nearby officer who had just entered. "It's all here," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "The proof. He can't deny." The officer nodded, moving toward Harold, who now looked like a caged animal. Margaret took Daniel's hand, her strength renewed by the presence of her son and sister. "This isn't just about us," she said to the crowd. "It's about truth prevailing. And Harold, he'll face the consequences of his actions." The camera zoomed in on Harold's defeated expression as he was led away, the guests whispering in awe. But Margaret's next words hinted at a deeper layer. "There's more to this story," she said, her eyes gleaming with a mix of sorrow and triumph. "A final secret that will change everything." The screen held on her face, the suspense building, ensuring viewers would stay until the end to uncover the last twist in this gripping tale. The grand hall of Willowbrook Country Club buzzed with a mixture of shock and anticipation as Harold was escorted out by the police, his hands cuffed behind him, his once proud demeanor reduced to a defeated slump. The ruby-red roses on the table seemed almost mocking now, their vibrant color a stark contrast to the shattered illusions of the evening. Margaret stood at the center of the stage, her blue floral dress catching the light, her pearl necklace a symbol of the elegance she maintained despite the chaos. Daniel, her son, stood beside her, his presence a quiet strength, while Ella Laner, still trembling from her confession, clutched Margaret's arm, seeking solace in the sisterhood that had endured decades of secrets. The guests, a mix of old friends, distant relatives, and local dignitaries, remained seated, their eyes wide with a hunger for the next chapter of this unfolding drama. The sound of Harold's protests faded as he was led outside, replaced by the soft hum of whispers, and the occasional clink of a glass set down too quickly. Margaret took a deep breath, her gaze sweeping the room, ensuring she had everyone's attention before she spoke again. "I told you there was more," she said, her voice steady, but laced with an emotion that hinted at a deeper wound. "Holt's confession, his crime. It's only part of the story. There's a reason I stayed silent for so long, a reason I let him think he'd won." Daniel squeezed her hand, a silent encouragement, and Margaret continued, "When I married Harold, I was a young woman, heartbroken and pregnant, with no one to turn to but my family. They saw Harold as a solution, a respectable man from a good family who needed a wife to secure his inheritance. But what I didn't know until years later was that Harold was drowning in debt. Gambling, bad investments, a string of failed ventures. He was on the brink of ruin. My family's money was his lifeline, and he'd do anything to get it, including murder." A murmur rippled through the crowd, and a few guests exchanged knowing glances as if pieces of Harold's past were clicking into place. Margaret's voice grew softer, more reflective. "James's death wasn't just about jealousy. Yes, Harold knew I loved James, knew we planned to run away together. But it was more than that. James had discovered Harold's debts, his dealings with unsavory people. James confronted him, threatened to expose him to warn my family. So Harold silenced him, ran him down on a quiet street, and made it look like an accident." Eleanor let out a choked sob, her guilt a heavy weight. "I saw it happen," she whispered loud enough for the front rows to hear. "I was walking home from the factory, taking a shortcut through the alley. I saw Harold's car speed up, saw James try to jump out of the way. I froze. I didn't know what to do. By the time I ran to him, it was too late. Harold drove off, and I didn't tell anyone. I was scared. And then Maggie needed me. She was pregnant, vulnerable. I thought keeping quiet was the only way to protect her." Margaret placed a hand on Eleanor's shoulder, her touch a silent forgiveness. "You did what you thought was right," she said, then turned back to the crowd. "But Harold's plan didn't stop with James. He married me, thinking he'd secured his future. He didn't know my father had already protected our family's wealth, put it into a trust that Harold could never touch. For 40 years he thought he'd won, thought he'd outsmarted us all. But he was wrong." The guests leaned forward, their curiosity a palpable force. Margaret's voice took on a new intensity. "The trust was for Daniel, my son. My father knew Harold wasn't the man he seemed, and he made sure our legacy would go to my child, not my husband. Harold spent decades trying to break into that trust, manipulating me, threatening me, thinking I'd cave. But I didn't. I stayed because I knew one day I'd have the strength to expose him and to give Daniel what was rightfully his." Daniel stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "I've known the truth since I was a teenager. Mom told me about James, about Harold's cruelty. We planned this night together, not just to celebrate an anniversary, but to end a nightmare. Tonight, I take control of the trust, and Harold faces justice for what he did to my real father." The room erupted in applause, a mix of admiration and relief. But Margaret raised a hand, silencing them. "There's one last thing," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Something Harold never knew. Something even Daniel doesn't fully understand yet. It's about James and a promise I made to him before he died." The camera zoomed in on her face, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, the suspense building as the story promised a final heart-wrenching revelation. The grand hall of Willowbrook Country Club was steeped in a tense silence, the air heavy with the echoes of Margaret's revelations. The chandeliers cast a soft, almost ethereal glow over the remaining guests, their faces a mixture of awe, sympathy, and anticipation. Harold had been taken away, the sound of his handcuffs clinking, fading into the night, leaving behind a void that Margaret now filled with her commanding presence. Daniel stood beside her, his jaw set with determination, while Eleanor clung to her sister's arm, her tear-streaked face a testament to the emotional toll of the evening. The ruby-red roses on the tables seemed to wilt under the weight of the truth, their vibrant hue a fading symbol of a marriage built on lies. Margaret's final words hung in the air, a promise of one last secret that drew every eye to her. She reached into the small clutch she carried, her fingers trembling slightly as she withdrew a weathered envelope, its edges yellowed with age. "This," she said, holding it up for all to see, "is the last piece of this story. A letter from James written the night before he died. He gave it to me, asking me to keep it safe, to open it only if I ever needed strength to fight back." The crowd leaned forward, their breaths held as she carefully broke the seal, her hands steadying with each passing second. She unfolded the letter, her voice quivering as she began to read. "My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone and you're facing a darkness I couldn't protect you from. Know that I loved you with all my heart, and our child, our son, will carry my spirit. But there's more. I discovered something about Harold, something that could ruin him. He's not just in debt. He's tied to a criminal syndicate laundering money through my factory. I confronted him, and I fear he'll stop at nothing to silence me. If he does, use this knowledge. There's a ledger hidden in the Factos old storage room behind the third panel on the left wall. It proves everything. Fight for our son, Maggie. Fight for us." The room erupted in stunned whispers, the revelation adding a layer of danger and intrigue to an already explosive night. Margaret lowered the letter, her eyes meeting Daniel's. "That ledger," she said, "is why Harold killed James. It's why he married me, to control me, to keep me from finding it. But I did find it years ago when I went back to the factory after my father's death. I kept it hidden, waiting for the right moment. Tonight, that moment has come." She nodded to an officer who had lingered near the stage, and he stepped forward, holding a thick, leather-bound book, the ledger. Daniel took it from the officer, his hands steady as he opened it, revealing pages of meticulous records, dates, amounts, names of shadowy figures tied to Harold's dealings. "This isn't just about my father's murder," Daniel said, his voice ringing with authority. "It's about bringing down a network Harold built. The police will use this to dismantle it, to ensure no one else suffers as we have." The crowd applauded, a mix of relief and admiration swelling in the room. But Margaret wasn't done. "There's one more thing," she said, her voice softening. "James wrote a postscript. He said if I ever found love again to take it because he'd want me to be happy. For 40 years, I thought that meant staying with Harold, protecting our son. But now I see it means letting go. Daniel, you're my strength now. And Eleanor, you're my heart. Together, we're free." She embraced them both, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. And the guests rose, their applause a thunderous wave of support. The camera panned to the ledger, then to the empty spot where Harold had stood before settling on Margaret, Daniel, and Eleanor as they walked out of the hall arm in arm. The screen faded to black, text appearing, "Justice served, love endures, a legacy reclaimed." But as the credits began to roll, a faint sound, a phone ringing played, hinting at a possible continuation, ensuring viewers would stay until the very end, wondering what might come next. Outside, the night air was cool, the stars obscured by the glow of police lights. Margaret paused, looking at the ledger in Daniel's hands. "We did it," she whispered. "For James." Eleanor nodded, wiping her eyes. "And for us." Daniel smiled, a rare lightness in his expression. "For the future." The camera lingered on their silhouettes against the club's facade, the story concluding with a sense of closure, yet leaving a door ajar for imagination. A perfect hook to keep the audience engaged.